Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here. As I look out over the room, I see a lot of faces that I know stood out at the polls for me this last week and manned the phones and did so much for me and my family, and I want to thank you certainly for that effort. And here we are today as a result of your efforts. Let me go ahead, and I know most of you have heard me speak several times before in the past, but let me go ahead and sort of give you my background a little bit in the context of my work experience and my judicial experience and my experience as a lawyer. I was recruited by Shell Oil Company out of college, and I came down to Houston in 1981, and I worked for Shell for about 8 years. I did not know JD during that time. From there, I went to Brown & Root. Well, let me back up. With Shell, I also enjoyed the same program JD got to do, and I was, my law school was paid for by Shell Oil Company. I couldn't have done it any other way. And to me, Shell is one of the best companies there is. And it taught me a lot of things. And of course, you don't get paid back unless you do well in school and pass your courses and so forth. And that's an incentive to do that because it was expensive. After my experience at Shell and being a manager and working in many, many divisions of Shell, from E&P to research and development to head office, procurement, land agent, pipeline, all the different areas within Shell Oil Company, I decided to move on to private practice because I was told that there was no opening in the legal department. And that, you know, they felt like if I wanted to go, that would be fine. I would have their blessing. And so I did go into private practice for a while. After a while, I did go work with Shell Oil, with Brown & Root. And I worked at many projects all across the world for Brown & Root in project management and procurement. I was manager of subcontracts administration, both domestically and internationally, and did a lot of traveling during that time. It was then in 1991 or 1992 during the Republican convention that a Democrat judge decided that she was not going to allow any protests at local area abortion clinics in Houston. And during that time, I was a driver for Tom DeLay, and I was driving around characters like Rush Limbaugh and B-1 bomber Bob Dornan from California, congressman there, and Congressman Chris Smith. And during that time, we would hear this story about these pastors and others that were arrested simply because they wanted to pray on publicly funded sidewalks and streets in front of abortion clinics. Up to that time, I was very pro-life. I was active in various ministries. I was on the board of directors of Texas Right to Life in Houston, Life Advocates. I've been on the board of a number of crisis pregnancy centers reaching out to women who needed a hand and needed encouragement to bring their babies and give them life. And that's very much a part of my life and our history together. We grew up in that environment. After that time, it became apparent that somebody had to step up and run against this individual who would have these people arrested and violate their First Amendment rights. And so I did, and I ran as a write-in candidate, and I garnered almost 85,000 votes. Now, not all 85,000 were counted, only 43,000 were counted because people wrote on various parts of the ballot and they got my name wrong and various other reasons that they were disqualified. But what happened was that they stored all those write-in ballots in the back of the room, and they were allowed to pile up and accumulate. And 3 or 4 days later in the election process, after the election, somebody said, you know, we ought to count those ballots back there. And sure enough, when they counted those ballots, 5 liberal Democrats lost their position in the race that they thought they had won. And then 5 conservatives replaced them. Now, I knew I was going to lose that race, but I had to run on a basis of principle and to do what was right. I've always tried in my life, sometimes knowing going into battle that maybe I might lose, but it still was the right thing to do. You see, God calls you not to always to victory. He calls you to duty and responsibility. And that's what all of us are called to do, and I know that's what I'm speaking to. Those of you in this room, I know you understand that principle. The next election I won, and I defeated that same judge. During that time, it was my belief that God himself put me in that position. And I put the Bible in front of the courthouse, and it stood there until the day I left, and sometime after until the ACU sued to have it removed. I always felt the Bible was always part of the courthouse. It used to be a day in this country where witnesses would put their hand on it. Sort of an archaic idea, I understand, but I believe that you can't expect somebody to really be truthful until they call upon a higher order, until they're accountable to a higher order. And so I was proud to do that. I also put the 10 Commandments in my courtroom. And in fact, I decorated my courtroom in such a way that honored the basic principles that founded this nation. And I was criticized for it, I was made fun of, I was laughed at, and I was sued. But it was still the right thing to do. And I don't apologize for it. In fact, if I'm elected, I will do it again. Because that's where I believe, that's the foundation of this country, and I'm not going to run from it. Now, some of you may be uncomfortable with that. I'm sorry, but that's my spirit. That's what I intend to do, and I'm proud of it. During my time on the bench, and the bench I inherited was the worst court, if we're going to talk about efficiency and what real judicial experience is, because that's what we're talking about here, not just me being a lawyer and a trial lawyer. And I know Lisa's a good criminal defense lawyer and a good prosecutor and so forth. But being a judge, ladies and gentlemen, is more than that. This is a general jurisdiction bench, after all, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just a criminal bench. It could not, you know, what happens is that the judges get together and they decide what cases a particular court's going to handle. And because it's a general jurisdiction, that is, it's been approved by the legislature in Texas to handle everything, civil, criminal, and family matters. Also, part of the responsibility of a judge is to serve on the juvenile board. Nobody else in this race has that experience except me. Nobody else in this race has ancillary experience. That is, being a judge over extraordinary relief. That's a responsibility that this court and this judge will have for he or she, whoever's elected. I'm the only one that has that kind of experience. Now, when I took that court, we were number 25 out of 25. We were the worst court in Harris County. In 3.5 years, we were number 2, which is where I held that until the day I left. So I understand how to make a court